lounging, son.
Hey, welcome to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and with me today, I have a really awesome guest. I have Chris Ryall, who's done you've worn so many different hats in the comic book industry. So I'm really excited to have you on the show and pick your brain a little bit on everything you've done, dude. So welcome.
Yeah, man. Well, I guess we'll see if I'm an awesome guest, but yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, dude, my pleasure. And I think you will be an awesome guest. So, I always do a little bit of research when I'm about to talk to one of my guests, and I learned a couple interesting things that I didn't previously know, and we'll get into that. But I always like to ask somebody that I'm talking to for the first time, a little bit about what started your love for comic books and kind of your secret origin in terms of your comic book reading.
Yeah, I credit my older brother. I had a brother who was 4 years older, so ever since I was old enough to know anything, like there were comics laying around the room. We shared a room like the entire time I grew up, so it was tight quarters, but he had comics all over the place, so that was a good benefit. And so probably the earliest memory I have of reading comics was down at some neighbor friends of his had a copy of this old Fantastic Four. It was Fantastic Four 130, had this Jim Steranko cover on there with like the whole team was on there. They were fighting like Sandman and Medusa and it was just like, as a little kid, just seeing that just kind of blew my mind. And so I would like contrive reasons to go back to their house to read this comic over and over. And then finally I was like, they're not going to miss this thing. So I just kind of rolled it up and put it on and went home with it. And like that started my comic collection. It didn't fully start my, life of crime. I started buying comics. So like that was kind of the start, like right from the earliest time that I could flip through things or read things, I was reading comics.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, I think that was what started my love for reading in general was comic books, and I probably started pretty young too myself. As you got older with your comic book reading and stuff, did you ever fall out? It's something I'm kind of interested in because like I continuously read, I never stopped, but I hear so often where you get in high school and you fall out of love with comics maybe for a little bit, then you come back in. Was that the case for you, or has it been comics ever since that day?
It was comics ever since. It's funny. It seems like there's two reasons that people fall out. One is either dating, you get distracted by other things that suddenly become more important, or lack of money. And what I like before I could work, I had a paper route, I did chores. Everything I did was just to buy comics. And so I just always found ways to, cut other things out so I could keep buying comics no matter what kind of like bad money situation I was in. And then I don't know, it was kind of always my own secret thing. Like there was nobody in high school that I ever knew was into comics. When I had roommates after I moved out, like they weren't into comics, but I would still go buy them. I would just kind of keep them hidden because, that was kind of a time when it wasn't cool. There were no good movies. There were no TV shows there. You weren't cool. You didn't look good around like friends and people you were dating and all of that stuff. But I never gave it up. Probably the closest I came was in the 90s when comics, like superhero comics, just started to really go into the shitter, like at least for my tastes. Everything just got so overblown and I felt like, all right, well, maybe these are no longer for me. But then you still find other things, Sandman and Preacher, and sort of as your tastes evolve, luckily comics do too. So I don't know. I always found things that made me want to keep reading.
I don't know. Like same here. Like I feel like my reading just always evolves. Like maybe I'm into something 1 year or for a couple of years, but then I'm constantly discovering stuff. Even if I'm discovering stuff that's before my time, I'm still discovering it. Like over the pandemic, especially, discovered a lot of older stuff I never got into. But I want to talk a little bit about, like I said, you've worn a lot of hats: editing, writing, publisher, president of a comic book company. The thing that I found interesting that I didn't previously know was you worked with Kevin Smith on moviepoopshoot.com.
Yeah, that was kind of my end to this whole thing. I'd always wanted to be a writer and I didn't know how to do it. And I wanted to write comics and didn't figure I'd ever have a way to do that. Cause I always just thought at that time, like you had to live in New York, it just like the stories I heard, everybody, the Marvel bullpen, this whole thing. So I would send out pitch letters and things that would go nowhere. And so I had a job where I was like a technical writer. I was writing like car brochures and things like that. And I didn't really like it. So I started writing comic reviews online just as a way to to have something a bit more creative, something that I cared a bit more about. One of the comics I reviewed was Kevin's Green Arrow book that he did with Phil Hester. And I didn't love it at the start because I didn't give it enough of a chance. Like the character at that point had died. And so this character that showed up in Kevin's series was sort of this anachronism. Like he talked like a 60s character. And I don't know, I wrote a review of it. I didn't slam it, but I didn't like it. And all of a sudden Kevin emails me to tell me that my review is wrong and that I'm full of shit. And I go, well, that's odd. Like, why would he care? And so I sort of went back and I defended my points. And then he came back and told me why I was wrong. And like, there was this weird back and forth for a few weeks that was really interesting to me. Cause like Kevin Smith has better things to do, presumably than argue with some idiot online. But you know, it was kind of before like just the glut of everything online all the time. You know what I mean? So there was like, he could probably go to the reviews that were out there and talk to the people and sort of explain what he was trying to do in ways that would be impossible now because there's just too much of everything now. Right. But so along the way, like I would come home and tell my girlfriend, like, I'm fighting with Kevin Smith again. She's like, why? Like, why is he wasting time with you? But it started getting kind of amicable. You know, we would then start joking back and forth and then just chatting. And so long story short, this is right when he was moving to LA. He said, hey man, because I was living in LA at the time. He said, hey, Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movie, Tobey Maguire's coming out. We had a mutual friend that we found out about. And he's like, why don't you go grab him? We'll go, I'll go see the movie together. And I'm like, all right, well, that'll be fun, you know? And so we all met up, had lunch, saw the movie, and then just got to talking about like works and what we all do and all that. And like, I was a corporate, I was a advertising copywriter. And so he said, why don't you come over to the house? And so I went over to the house and we hung out. And like, as we're talking, he said, look, I couldn't hire you away from that company, but I could hire you in addition to, like, I could afford to pay you this if you would take this website of mine. That was just it was kind of an Ain't It Cool News, like a parody site in one of my movies. He's like, I want to turn that into a legitimate website that, you know, that covers movies and comics and TV. And I think you'd be the right guy to run it. You know, are you interested in that? And I said, well, hell yeah. I mean, I had no idea how to run a website, but I took the job and I went out front and had a little panic attack. And he goes, you know, we're launching it in 2 weeks. And I lined up press on CNN. And so it's got to be up and running in 2 weeks. And so I had to figure out really quickly how to run a website. I mean, I had help obviously on that, but just started putting up comic content, talking to comic creators. And so the story's going on way too long.
I'm into it, dude. Go for it.
But so one of the creators that I had been talking to was a guy named Steve Niles, who did 30 Days of Night at IDW before I was aware of the place. I bought it off the rack, but I didn't really know anything about the company. But Steve and I got to talking about a thing. We started pitching Marvel on some stuff together. And then he called me one day and said, hey, IDW, this company in San Diego, is losing their editor-in-chief and they need somebody. And he's like, are you interested in that? I'd be happy to put in a word for you. And so I'm like, yeah, I'll go talk about that. And so the funny thing about it is Kevin offered me the job running his comic book store that he was opening in Westwood in LA, right at the same week that IDW offered me the job as editor-in-chief. And so I kind of had that coin toss of, well, do I want to be a comic retailer or do I want to be a comic publisher? And, you know, I certainly saw the merits of both, but I mean, I wanted to write comics. I want to be involved in making comics. And so anyway, that whole Kevin Smith experience is what led me to IDW.
That's awesome. I mean, like, besides my family members, Kevin Smith's my favorite person on the planet. Like, that's for me, like being able to like one day, like be able to do an interview with him, even though he's done plenty of them. Like, that's like my ultimate goal, because I just love the type of person he is, how down to earth he is. Every time you meet him in public, he's always so personable, and he's just an awesome guy. So he's like when
yeah. So I mean, that was a really weird thing. And like, then I just felt bad that like the way I got talking to him was because, you know, I didn't like one of his comics that I later read the entire thing. And I go, man, this is a really good book. I should have waited before reviewing. I just reviewed the first issue, you know? And, yeah. And so, but yeah, I mean, I certainly owe a great deal of me getting into IDW to Kevin and that whole experience.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. I don't know what I would have done in that situation either, because like you, like I've worked in comic book retail. I still work part-time at a shop. So running his store or running a comic book company, like that's a hard toss-up. But like I probably would have went the route you went as well, because I think creating comic books and just being a part of that process has always intrigued me and has always been something that is a goal that I strive to do one day, you know.
Yeah, and I mean the good thing about it all is that the comic store, like it was in a very high rent district in LA. Like
Yeah, I
you
went
had
there
to
one
have,
time.
yeah, you had to have huge success in an area like that to really make it work. And like comics are a pretty low margin business, and so I think that store was always going to have a difficult time in that space, and so it didn't last too long. So he ended up closing it down, and so I think from that regard too, I think the IDW thing was a smart move.
Yeah, definitely a smart move. So, I mean, I think it was around 2002 you started on Movie Poop Shoot.
Right.
2004 is when you became editor in chief at IDW, right?
Yeah, and so for a while I actually did both. I was still running the website for Kevin for, I don't know, maybe it was another year and a half into IDW, and then I had a kid in 2006, and it was just like something had to give, and so at that point I think Kevin was ready to sort of pull the plug on the website from what it was, because at a certain point Miramax was helping fund it as well. It was sort of part of this marketing budget that they'd put forth for Kevin, and Kevin certainly wasn't gonna, it wouldn't be smart business to take a big loss on the thing once the marketing fund stopped fronting the site. And so he decided to change the site up, and it just made sense at that point to try to keep the comic thing going, but also have a kid running around. And so that was where my time went after that.
Yeah, for sure. So like, what is it? Because I've spoken to editors before, but being an editor in chief, what does that position look like?
It's funny at IDW, like for a while, it was also the exact same thing as being the editor. I was the only person in editorial when I first started. I was like employee number 6 or 7, something like that. But so basically, editor in chief is the person who's kind of overseeing and figuring out the direction of the publishing line. So it's what you're going to publish, who you're going to work with. And then, like, at least for me, it got as granular as really digging into each of the stories, going through the scripts, going through the art as it's coming in, just taking a book basically from idea to every step of the way and then getting it ready and off to print. And so once I was able to hire a couple editors to run point on kind of the day-to-day, the moving of pages from the artist to a colorist and getting the lettering passes and all of that done, then it became more of a focus on just kind of the broader picture of what the company's going to publish, what we think we should publish next year. And then it also sort of morphed into either talent acquisition, going out and finding creators I wanted to work with, or finding licenses to bring aboard too. Like when I started, Joss Whedon's Angel and CSI were the 2 big license books the company was doing, but I was involved in the pitch to get Transformers. And so once I brought Transformers in, then that became a whole other thing, because then you're working directly with the licensors, figuring out, what they want on their titles, and then how to best make them work on the comic side. And then, going after other licenses and sort of acquiring more and more properties like that too.
And how do you just like, when trying to acquire like a licensed property, how do you decide what the right move is in terms of like turning it into a comic? Like CSI, like at first thought to me doesn't mean, I don't think like, okay, let's make a comic book out of it. Like that doesn't come to mind. Transformers had the history of comic books, right?
Yeah.
So like, it made sense to kind of go in after that. I believe Dreamwave was the one that had it right before. But what makes you decide like this is the property I think would be good and that we could get the right talent to produce a pretty good comic for it?
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the CSI thing goes, like they found they sort of found an interesting into it in that I never really watched the show, but I know they would do these sort of gritty flashbacks to the crime itself or whatever. And so Ashley Wood came in and did this gritty style for those pages, and then the rest of the pages were drawn, sort of with actor likenesses and all of that. So I think the storytelling approach on that worked for like the CSI fans who started buying the comic in droves, not really comic fans otherwise. Like we, came to find that a lot of them were, people who are middle-aged or mothers and wives and things like that watched the TV show, but didn't really buy comics regularly. So it worked in that regard. But for me, I always look for what's a property that's going to appeal to just the broadest number of people. And yeah, to your point, like it's got to really make sense as a comic and not just be something that you do for commercial reasons. Like we tried to never chase things that were just only about the money because, let's say you do, I don't know, American Idol or The Bachelor comics, like you would hate yourself and maybe they would sell, but it's like you live with those things for years, even if you stop publishing them, you're still sort of maintaining bits of it for, I don't know, the back catalog or foreign rights or the accounting people having to pay royalties. So you never really want to take one on that you hate. Like, so it all kind of came from a point of, all right, do we like this? Does somebody here like Transformers enough to want to live with it every day? And we did. And so that was always kind of the first step in it, was just, do we care enough about this to really want to live with it for a number of years?
And what were some of the difficulty? Like, what were some of the more difficult properties that you had that you acquired while your tenure?
Transformers was a hard one to get, only in that at that point, IDW was only like, they were doing CSI and just started publishing Joss Whedon's Angel, but otherwise it was all horror comics, and some art books with Ash Wood, but it was Steve Niles' horror books and then some other stuff that sort of felt similar to Steve's work. And so to go into Hasbro, like we went out to Rhode Island and sat down and they go, well, who are you guys? Like, why are we even in the room with you when, Marvel or Dark Horse or whoever's outside waiting to pitch us too? Like, why would we even entertain this company we've never even heard of? And so my big pitch was, you could go with the Marvel, you could go with the whoever else, but they're always going to have their properties that they take care of first. So their top talent is going to be who they put on Spider-Man and X-Men and whatever else. We don't have that at IDW. So we're going to make Transformers as important to us as Spider-Man is to Marvel. And so it was, I think that was kind of the appeal, was that they could be sort of the top title, the top piece in our portfolio. Whereas if they went with somebody who was more established and publishing 40, 60 titles a month, they would be one of X number of books. The other thing for me was, like, as a kid, I read a lot of the tie-in books when I was growing up, Star Wars and whatever else. And they were hit and miss, but more often miss, and a lot of them you could tell were just being done because they were a money grab. And I think that really always translates to the reader. Reader can tell when you don't really care about a thing. And so I just wanted to make sure that the creators we brought in and the way we built these books were, where we all cared about them, because I think that really does translate. And so, if we like and care about the thing we're doing, then chances are the reader's going to care too. And so, yeah, it kind of got us off and running. From there, it certainly got easier. Once we had Transformers, then people go, oh shit, what's IDW? Oh, they're the people that publish Transformers. Then some licensors started bringing their titles to us and going, well, would you consider publishing this? And so that all made it so much easier. Once you've proven yourself, once you've proven you can handle something big and important like Transformers, then others, pay attention to. There are always some that don't quite work the way you want them to, like on paper, the creative team might sound great, but something about just whatever it is, that weird arcane thing that goes into making comics special, sometimes it just doesn't work. And so there were some that, like, we had high hopes for, like Speed Racer. When the Speed Racer movie was coming, I really wanted those comics to be something cool, because I remember Speed Racer when I was a kid, and they just didn't land for whatever reason. But that's kind of how it goes.
From my perspective, I think that IDW with the licensed properties is more hit than miss. Like, and from my perspective, at least from what I read, I'm a huge Ninja Turtle fan. I think what IDW has done from the get-go with that franchise has been nothing short of phenomenal, and even the new ones that continue to get acquired, like, I don't read all of them, but like the ones that, like the Back to the Future, I didn't know I wanted a Back to the Future comic, but I dug it. Like, I love those movies. So, and I felt like you guys, like the company, honored what came before, but it still felt, like it worked in comic books.
Yeah, and it like our approach was always to involve the creators if they wanted to still be involved. And luckily Kevin Eastman, was ready to jump back in on Turtles. And Kevin is sort of this singular force in comics as far as like his ability to talk to fans and sort of get fans excited and convey his enthusiasm. Like he's one of the best people I've ever met in this business. And so the fact that he's the guy that created the Turtles, but still wants to be involved to the degree that he does, he's not only a great creator, but he's just the best, spokesperson or proselytizer to go out there and really get people excited about Turtles. So that one's kind of the mountaintop as far as the way these things can go. But yeah, with Back to the Future, we involved Bob Gale, and with like The Crow, we got James O'Barr back involved. And so when you can do that, then it sort of adds a veracity to the fans too, because they realize you're not just scrapping what's gone before, but you're sort of, like you say, paying tribute to it or, being respectful of it.
And how do you decide, because like I said, you were the publisher as well, president of the company at one point as well. How do you decide how you balance the licensed properties, but while also bringing in like creator-owned books?
I always saw the licenses as, because they sort of had their built-in audience, so you could usually count on those launching better than smaller books, which sometimes have to find an audience. So it was kind of like back in the day when Fox would do these big movies, and then they had Fox Searchlight, which was their art film division. Like I always viewed the licensed stuff as sort of the blockbusters that were going to then help fund or offset the risk on the smaller titles, because it was always important to all of us. IDW was a place that started with 30 Days a Night, so its very first title was a creator-owned book, and so it was important to always do books that creators were directly involved in. But like I say, some are titles that take a while to you lose money sometimes at the start until you really find an audience. Even something like Lock and Key, which now became this colossal thing in comics and now on Netflix, it was a humble seller when it first started. And so it's nice to have the big hits, or even some of the old art books and things that we've done with Marvel and others to help offset that risk. And so you can be patient and give smaller titles the chance to, hopefully grow and find their audience.
And can you talk a little bit about how did Lock and Key come about? Because you were the editor on that book.
I had no idea who Joe Hill was, other than I got this short story collection he did called 20th Century Ghosts. And at the time it was only printed in the UK. Like it was a tiny little book, but I was reading these stories and they just had something special about them. There was just something about the way he told stories that if you told someone what it was about, they might go, yeah, I've seen that before. And then you go, well, read the story. And then you realize that like he just had a different way of telling a story that might on the surface sound familiar and was just deeper and sort of more, I don't know, it was just a better experience. And it sort of gave me this Neil Gaiman kind of vibe of another guy who could do that kind of thing, sort of take an idea that maybe on the surface is familiar and then do something wholly original and unique and really exciting with it. And so I just reached out to Joe to ask if he ever had interest in writing comics. With authors, usually I start with the idea of adapting their works, their written works to comics, because that's a comics, because try to be respectful of the day job is the thing that takes up most of their time. And he said, yeah, I don't really want to do that, but see what you think of these ideas. And he ran some different comic ideas by me. And one was for this, big spooky house with these mysterious transformative keys. And I go, well, that one sounds interesting. And so we just started developing it. And, then we were trying to figure out, well, who's the right artist for this thing? And there was a guy, actually, he started on CSI, Gabriel Rodriguez. Mm-hmm. And along the way, like I could tell right from the start that he was something special. And so he was a guy that I really tried to sort of be careful and smart about each thing that I offered him, because I wanted to keep sort of putting more and more high profile things in front of him. And so he went from CSI to, we did a George Romero zombie movie adaptation. And then he did a Clive Barker project and Neil Gaiman's Beowulf. And so I knew he had to be the guy to draw Lock and Key. But like on all these things, you always want the writers to feel like they have say. And so I would, I told Joe, I'll put some samples in front of you. So I sent him all these samples, and all the other samples were kind of shitty. Like I made sure that the one that stood out was going to be Gabe. And so he goes, yeah, I like that guy. I'm like, oh, you do? Okay. but it had to be Gabe. Like I knew he was the guy that could really do this, and it fortuitously worked out really well. And those guys have this, like, I don't know, they're so in sync when they're working on the book, and sort of have reached the point where they're finishing each other's thoughts. Like it's become such a just special partnership all around on that book. So it's one of those that I hold in just probably the highest regard of anything I did there.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of my favorite things to ever come out of IDW. I was late to the party on that. I didn't read it until all 6 volumes were already done, and I couldn't put it down. I knocked out all 6 trades in like a week, and maybe less than a week. I just couldn't stop reading. It's a phenomenal series, and then you even brought up Sandman. Like that crossover just felt so natural to have those 2 worlds meet. You know,
Yeah.
like that was an awesome crossover. Probably one of my favorite crossovers I've ever read. I was only upset it wasn't longer. You know?
Yeah, I know. Well, it's so weird because I was reading through it again after it was published, and I go, man, we just told this big momentous Lock and Key story, but we're able to play with Sandman and like the Sandman universe as part of it. Like, I'm still kind of amazed that we got away with it. I think it started probably about 10 years ago. We were in Pittsburgh for the first filming of the first iteration of the Lock and Key pilot when it was going to originally be on Fox. And we were sitting around talking one night, and there was just talk of that Sandman and a certain thing in the Sandman universe, and certainly the key, you know, that Lucifer gives up when he sort of walks away from hell in that book, could make a good Lock and Key story. And so we just kind of threw it out there as a goof, thinking it would never work or never be allowed to work, you know. But Joe's friends with Neil, and Neil, when Joe heard the idea, or when Joe told him the idea, he was like, yeah, that'd be fun. You should do it. And so having Neil's sort of tacit approval certainly helped us with DC, you know, because DC's like, well, wait, you can't mess with Sam. And I go, but Neil likes it. And they go, oh, well, if Neil likes it, then yeah, let's do it. And they were great. Like they let us they didn't push back on any part of anything in that book. So it was just great. I'm really just happy and amazed we got to do it.
Yeah, it was a great story, great book. And yeah, it definitely didn't feel like anything was I don't want to say watered down, that may not be the right term, but it didn't feel like you guys had to like take anything out. It felt like you, like reading it as a fan, and now to hear you say it, that nothing was taken, they let you do what you wanted to do. That was awesome.
Yeah, and, you know, it's rare to get the creators of one of the titles in a crossover, like doing the crossover. So I think that really made it special too, is just that like the people that created Lock and Key were able to tell a Lock and Key story in Sandman and not have it just be this, you know, big sort of elevated intercompany crossover that doesn't really matter. Like this story actually matters to both universes. So it was cool. It was fun.
And I want to talk a little bit too about, you know, you said you wanted to be a writer in comic books, and you wrote during your tenure at a large amount of titles, right? One of them, you know, is with a collaborator that you mentioned, who you have a new thing going on, which we'll talk about, with Ashley Wood, you know, Zombies versus Robots. How did you decide? Like, you also wrote some of the licensed properties as well, I believe, right? So how did you pick and choose like the stuff that you kind of wanted to write? Was it stuff that you were a fan of, or was it stuff that the project kind of came about and you're like, okay, yeah, that all right, and then deciding the stuff that you wanted to do that was your own creator own stuff?
You know, on anything that was like licensed, like Kiss, or I wrote the first few issues of the Transformers movie prequel with Simon Furman. On things like that, like I've always tried to only take writing gigs for myself that didn't take away from freelancers. Just somehow that feels wrong to like award yourself the job instead of a, you know, better freelancer or something like that. So in some cases, like with the Transformers movie stuff, they were so secretive and NDA that there was almost no way to involve outside creators because it just got too complicated for secrecy reasons. And so there were some things I did for like that really needed to be kept in-house. There was a couple like the Kiss comics. Like my older brother got me into two things, comics and Kiss. And so I was like, well, I got to write Kiss comics to try to impress my brother, you know? And so stuff like that I would do. And ROM, because ROM was one that it was like a childhood favorite that I I chased a license for like 10 years trying to untangle all these legal messes that sort of kept it from being a comic. But otherwise, yeah, it was just if I then had a creator that I wanted to work with, like a Sam Keith or an Ashwood or Ben Templesmith, then I would do a thing. But I tried to pick and choose them sparingly enough and not, like I say, hopefully do things where I could have easily just hired somebody else instead. Because I think part of the job as the editor is, you have a responsibility to cultivate talent and bring in new talent and all of that. And so I tried to not let the one conflict with the other.
So let's talk about some of the more current stuff. Now, you left IDW in 2020. Was the decision to leave kind of prompted by your new publishing endeavor that you're currently doing?
No, so I started that with Ash back in like 2018. So I left IDW twice, like in the last 3-4 years. Mm-hmm. In 2017, I stepped aside for about a year and joined Skybound, Robert Kirkman's company. And then about a year into that, IDW called and said, "Hey, we'd like you to come back and take over as president and publisher." And there was a part of me that sort of lamented the fact that I didn't quite take on those roles. I wasn't able to get those roles before. And so, I thought, okay, well, I'll go back and then I can really kind of steer the company in the direction that I feel like I would like to bring it. And then when after I was back for about a year and a half, it just started to make sense that the company do what it wanted to do, and then I do what I wanted to do, and they weren't necessarily fully on parallel paths anymore, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to get back to doing comics directly again. Like, president and publisher is so much management and sort of staffing things, and just as you sort of move up, you sort of move away from the things that you really like or feel like you're good at. And so I just wanted to get back to making comics and working directly with people and all that, and hopefully simplify some of the day-to-day. Like, running a company isn't necessarily to my personality, at least a company of that size with sort of as many different voices, weighing in on what the company should be. Mm-hmm. And so, we are starting small now with this new venture, and seeing what it might be able to become.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely excited. I know that I noticed the first project is with a collaborator, kind of, right? Like, it's a Joe Hill project, Rain, that's with David Brewer writing, Zoe Thorogood. So, but this is it SYZYGY? How do you?
It's funny. Like, along the way, working with Ash, like Ash's art books all have titles that nobody can pronounce or spell, and so he loves words that you can't spell or pronounce or define, and so SYZYGY is along those lines. It's sort of a cosmic term about celestial bodies that kind of intertwine and what have you. So it definition wise has some relevance, but it's a word that nobody can spell or pronounce. So SYZYGY. But we're starting small, just doing the Joe Hill adaptation, and I'm really excited about that though, because I love David Boer, and whose book Canto is one of IDW's better sellers, and better books, I think. And then Zoe Thorogood, I think, is this just amazing new talent, and I'm really excited to see what she does, and I think she's just going to keep ascending too. So I'm just kind of glad we were able to get her to do this on her way up to whatever else she's going to do in her career. So
yeah, she's amazing. I mean, The Impending Blindness of Billy Scott was probably one of my favorite books I read over the pandemic. It's
and she was like 21, 22 when she did that book.
No, I told somebody that she was that old and it was her first graphic novel, and they couldn't believe it. They thought I was full of shit. I'm like, no, that's her first graphic novel. Like,
it was amazing. Yeah, and she did a couple issues of like things like Ha Ha, right, that Image book that I thought was great. And so I mean, that's kind of what I want to do, is just find either people that I like working with or new people that I want to try to elevate, or just give projects to, and just sort of build it out from there.
So what else? Is there other stuff in the works? Is it all going to be published through Image? What's
I don't know. That's actually a good question. Because they're like, when I left IDW, I left with the rights to about 30 different titles. Some of the things that I created or some things that I developed with other creators. And so I have this sort of portfolio of books but I can't run them all through Image. at least not too soon if I did, because that I don't want to go glutting, what's already a robust publishing schedule for them. And so I got to figure that part of it out too. But yeah, so we're starting with Rain, the Joe Hill thing, and then Ash and I are doing Zombies versus Robots, which is our book that we've done since 2006. And I have a bunch of other things lined up. I don't know exactly where they're going to slot in and what'll come next, because just trying to figure out I don't know, output and what books are going to be ready first and all of that. So there's a lot of kind of that early publishing schedule shuffling of thinking it's going to be this and then moving things. And so I'm not sure from there. But yeah, it'll be fun to figure it all out.
Yeah, I mean, I've known a lot of publishers and high profile creators, right, have utilized stuff like Kickstarter. Is that something that has been kind of tossed around in terms of maybe Ashley would art book, right? Like through SYZYGY, it's and you do Kickstarter. Is that a platform that you might want to utilize for the company?
I think we will, yeah, just because part of it is like, this is a self-funded venture right now. So I think anything like that certainly helps get books done sooner. So yeah, we're talking about that. Like, it is just the two of us, and he's off in Australia. So a lot of the sort of day-to-day falls to me. And so I'm just, trying to manage like getting the books going and making sure those all happen, but then figuring out, what I can take on as far as Kickstarters. But I think all of those things are going to come into play. And then, which is kind of the exciting thing about the market now, is there's just so many different ways to put content in front of people, between all the crowdfunding platforms. And I mean, even anything like, I don't know, the newsletter platforms and everything else. Like, it's kind of fun that the rules seem to be out the window at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting time in the industry. A lot has happened in just under 2 years, I would say. Kind of like the pandemic, so much stuff shifted around in terms of distribution. You got Substack, a lot of creators going to Kickstarter, even like I said, high profile publishers doing the same thing.
Webtoons and Tapas, right. A lot of those. But I will say, so all of those things like are certainly big and viable options. But Image did an ash can for this first issue of Rain, and I got the box and I opened it, and like, just to still be able to pull out and hold hard copies, like, still gets me excited in ways that other forms of comics don't. And so like, I still love just being able to make stuff, like physical things. So yeah, it's fun getting back into it again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to see what you guys have in the works. I'm a huge Ashley Wood fan, so anytime I get some new art from him is always something I'm looking forward to. And same David Boer, Zoe Thurgood, that book when it was announced, I mean, great creative team by really awesome creators. So I can't wait to see all the stuff that you have in the works. Like I said, and I too love physical stuff. I refuse to switch over to digital. I won't, unless that's the only way to read a comic book. I think that the physical medium is to me, that is comic books. So if you take that away, it's not the same experience,
I mean, I've gotten back into vinyl the last few years too. And there's just something about like having the thing that sort of makes you care more about it. Whereas digital, it all just feels so much more, or so much less, I don't know, important somehow. I mean, and I read some comics digitally, but I still, I do like having that print thing. Like, I was at the San Diego Comic Convention last weekend, and just, walking around and people are getting their books signed and all of that, watching the excitement around Kevin Eastman scribbling and sketching on Turtles comics. Like, that can't be replicated digitally. And so it's fun that that's still such a viable part of the medium.
I agree.
I mean, look, I still like surrounding myself with
I know, I'm jealous. I want to spin a rack, but they're so fucking expensive, man.
They are, although this one I got for like $80. I just found it in a comic store.
Oh, nice.
And like a nerd, I like have dressed it all up with Christmas themed covers for the holiday. So
I like it, dude. I like it. Besides your publishing thing, is there anything in the works, anything you're writing that you can talk about or tease, any other projects?
There's a lot of maybe things. Like, I've pitched a couple animated series with some friends that have gone down a road, but not fully settled on that road. So, with those kind of things, like anything in the sort of TV or media space, it's just like, you never, ever know. because things are moving along. Like even our Zombies versus Robots, we sold to Sony, and it was sort of moving along this track, and then it all kind of came to a stop. But I did during the pandemic, I sold a TV show. A friend and I pitched an all new TV show thing that we created to a big streamer. And so I spent a bunch of the year writing the pilot and rewriting the pilot. And so that feels like it's in a good place as far as the studio is concerned. And they're out to a couple actors with it right now. So it could still move and become a thing, but it also could not. So there's been a lot of that this past year, is just taking on a lot of different side projects to stay busy and sort of just spread out as much as I can. But I don't know if anything will necessarily come of them. I wrote a short story for a book that was supposed to come out last month and moved to March. It's an Alien Predator prose anthology. So it's kind of fun to do a prose story, and just trying to stay as busy as possible in as many ways as possible.
Awesome, man. Well, I mean, I'm super stoked for everything you have in the works. Before I let you go, though, I was wondering if maybe you could share like maybe 2 or 3 of the most recent books that you've read that you really dug.
Oh, novels or comics?
Comics.
God, this is always like, I'll go upstairs and be like, why didn't you mention this, and this? Because I always just instantly draw a blank on these things. But like this week, I just picked up that Kelly Sue DeConnick and Phil Jimenez Wonder Woman Historia book that, like, I know Phil had been drawing for 4 years, and it's just amazingly gorgeous for a comic. I have this Phil Jimenez Transformers and Justice League piece on my wall right here. That's where awesome. We tried to get that going years ago. So I love Phil, and I'm always excited about stuff that he does. But let me think. I mean, certainly anytime Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips put out a new graphic novel, that is a point of excitement for me. Like, I think those guys are among the best teams working in comics. Jesus, I see, this is the worst. There's a ton of books that I like, and I can never think of them. Like, I really like James Tynan's Last House on the Lake. I think is a really good book. Department of Truth is a really fun book. Not to only mention James titles, but I don't know. I read a ton, which is probably why they all start to kind of blur together in my head.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way. People ask me for a recommendation. I'm like, oh man. Like, and I.
Yeah, what are you reading? What are you reading that you're excited about?
Man, it's a mix of old stuff and new stuff. Like, I just picked up the Madman Library edition. The Michael Allred,
Mike Allred is the greatest.
Yeah, he's awesome. So I just picked that up. I've been reading a lot of old stuff recently. Again, all Brubaker. Zdarsky's Daredevil has been really good.
Chip is an amazing writer. I think Chip is so good. I'm so happy that he's sort of
Stillwater.
Yeah, Stillwater's great. Yeah, I think Chip is really solid. I actually I love Madman too, but I've been reading Concrete. I never read Concrete before.
I haven't either. I've never read it.
It's really good. I've read a ton of Junji Ito manga over the last year, because I think that guy just does horror comics in a way that, like, nobody else seems to effectively do the way he does. Like, it's really hard to sort of shock the way he does when you turn the page. You can be gross in a drawing, but it's hard to sort of scare the way that like movies can with noise and everything else. But his books they just creep me the hell out. I think that guy's just a stunning talent. I don't know. I'm sure there's dozens that we'll both remember right when we hang up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the cool thing about the comic book industry, especially right now, is there's so many different types of comic books, so many different types of stories, art styles, writing styles, that it really is. I mean, there's a comic book for everybody. I feel. I mean, you can find the right comic book for every person.
I think Kirkman's just thinking of that
Firepower. Oh yeah, I just read the new issue.
Firepower is really good. Michael Morrissey's was it Berserker's the Keanu book? It's the Black Mask book he's doing with the talking axe that sort of dunk on blood.
I haven't seen that one.
It's so much fun. Just about anything Black Mask or Vault put out gets my attention, because they've just made really smart choices. And so, like I say, pretty much anytime I see a new book of theirs, same with Ahoy. I think Ahoy does really fun books, especially Mark Russell's stuff is really smart and funny and always very biting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I
Oh,
read
yeah,
that kind of
that's-
stuff, but I don't remember it evidently.
Yeah, neither do I mean, when you read that much, it's hard to like just like always pinpoint. Another
Yeah.
shout out I would say is Friday, the Brubaker and Marcos Martin book that
I just picked that up in print. I bought them digitally through the through Panel Syndicate, but I just saw the print book in a store this week, and so
it was
yeah,
really,
I just
yeah,
picked
it's
that
really
one
good.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ed is amazing. Ed's a really good writer.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, thank you for sharing some of like your recommendations. Thank you for sharing your time with me and talking about all the cool stuff that you've done over your career. But for everybody listening and watching, I was wondering if you could really quick before we go, share where we can find you online and where we can stay up to date on all things SYZYGY.
Yeah, so there's a website called World of SYZYGY that I know we need to get a little bit better about updating, but it's got various pieces of art and mentions of when things are coming. The first title, Rain, launches, it's in stores January 12th. And then like social, I'm Chris_Ryall, RYALL on Instagram and Twitter. And that's primarily where I talk about all this stuff. I don't really use there is a SYZYGY publishing account also on those places where a lot of the artwork is posted, but I tend to talk everything up just through my personal. And yeah, I'm excited that I don't think I had a book in market this year, so I'm happy that January is going to kick off with something, and then hopefully see where it all goes from there.
Yeah, dude, and I like I said, I'm excited to see it, and I would definitely love to help promote and talk about any future projects when you can talk about them.
Yeah, I love it, man. This is a really good talk. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for this.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you, and I can't wait to do this with you again.
Excellent. Yeah, I look forward.